11 of the fantasy football season, and here's a few quarterbacks I would bench this week. The first guy, Derek Carr, the Las Vegas Raiders. So Derek Carr, he's been up and down this season, in my opinion. But right here, he don't have many great weapons on the offensive end of things. I know he's got Hunter Renfrow, who's been pretty decent, and obviously Waller, who's one of the best tight ends in all of pro football. But the last few games, he's been hit or miss here, is Derek Carr. Week 7 versus Philly, 323 passing yards, 2 touchdowns in it, though. Week 9 at the New York Giants, 296 passing yards, a touchdown, 2 interceptions, and a fumble loss. And Week 10 versus the Kansas City Chiefs, 261, 2 touchdowns, an interception, and 18 yards rushing. So this week here, middle of the pack matchup versus the Cincinnati Bengals that give up the 17th most fantasy points to quarterbacks on the season. So right here, Cincinnati's coming off a bye and a bad loss as well in Week 9. So right here, I think Cincinnati in this ball game, they're going to limit Derek Carr in this one. I know Carr could get a lot of garbage time like he did last week versus the Chiefs, but for some reason, I just don't feel like he's going to be a safe start this week. And he's been an inconsistent quarterback for the most of the season here. So right here, I would bench Carr if you got better options this week. The next quarterback I will bench this week, Kirk Cousins of the Minnesota Vikings. So Kirk Cousins, it's been a pretty solid season for him, no doubt about it. But this week, it's a very tough matchup versus the Green Bay Packers. We're pretty much shutting teams down left and right the last few weeks here. And the Packers give up the 6th least amount of fantasy points to quarterbacks on the season. But the last few games for Cousins, Week 8 versus Dallas, 184 passing yards, touchdown, and 18 rushing yards. Week 9 at the Ravens, 187 passing yards, 2 passing touchdowns, and a rushing touchdown. And Week 10 at the Chargers, 294 passing, 2 touchdowns, and a fumble loss. So right here, Kirk Cousins, we know he's got great weapons in Justin Jefferson, Adam Thielen, Dalvin Cook, and even Tyler Conklin stepping up this season. But in my opinion, I just don't think Kirk Cousins has a good game in this one. And if he don't get those touchdowns, he don't get bailed out a lot. And this Minnesota Viking team this season, their offense has been disappointing, in my opinion. Cook's not having a season like he did last year. Jefferson and Thielen both have one good game and then disappear the next. So it's just an inconsistent offense. And right now, versus a tough defense in Green Bay, I will bench Cousins this week. In the third and final quarterback I would bench this week's Carson Wentz of the Indianapolis Colts. So Carson Wentz, he's been pretty solid over the last month of the season here. But right here, last week versus Jacksonville, he only had 7.10 fantasy points, 180 yards in that ball game. And right here, very tough matchup versus the Buffalo Bills that give up the least amount of fantasy points to quarterbacks on the season. So the last few weeks here for Wentz, Week 8 versus Tennessee, 231 passing yards, 3 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. Week 9 versus the Jets, 272 passing yards, 3 TDs. But now had the tough matchup versus Jacksonville, like I mentioned. And he's got a tough one versus the Buffalo Bills that are one of the best defenses, no doubt about it, in all of pro football. So right here, I think it's better off if you just bench Carson Wentz, because I'm not expecting much. This Buffalo defense, they clamp down receivers, they get to the quarterback, and they force turnovers. Like Mike White last week, everyone was singing his praises after that crazy game in Week 8 versus Cincinnati. But Mike White, they made him look mediocre to a bad quarterback as this Bill defense with 4 interceptions. So right here, I would just bench Wentz this week. So that's a few quarterbacks I will bench here for Week 11 of the fantasy football season.